Tonight, a quiet story from the end of summer, high in the mountains long ago, about an old shepherd, his good dogs, and the long, slow walk home, bringing the whole flock down to the warm valley before the winter came. At the very end of the summer, on the morning they would go down, old Anders stood at the door of his hut on the high pasture and felt the first real cold of the year come off the peaks. All summer he had been up here, high on the mountain, where the grass grew sweet and short, and the air was thin and clear. Up here, with his flock and his dogs, in the little stone hut, the way shepherds had spent the high summers on this mountain, for longer than anyone could say. It had been a good summer, warm and long, the sheep grown fat on the mountain grass, the lambs of the spring grown strong and sturdy over the months of it. But summer on a mountain does not last. The mornings had been getting colder for weeks now, and this morning, looking up, Anders saw what he had been waiting to see. The first snow of the year, fallen in the night, dusting white the high peaks above the pasture. That was the sign. That was always the sign. The snow on the tops meant the summer was over and the winter was coming, and that it was time, today, to take the flock down off the high mountain, down the long path, all the way down to the home valley far below, where the snow did not lie deep and the sheep could winter warm and safe. Up here, in another few weeks, the snow would come down off the peaks and cover the pasture and close the high pass, and no flock could live in it. Down there, the valley was still green. So today, they would go down, the way Anders had taken them down at the end of every summer of his long life. There was no hurry about it. The snow was only on the very tops. The deep snows that close a mountain were weeks off yet, and Anders knew the mountain and its weather the way he knew his own two hands. And he had set out for home, as he always did, in good and easy time. But it was a long way down, a whole day's slow walking, down off the heights and through the high rocks and the pass, and down the long green slopes to the valley. And a flock walks slowly, and so they would start in the morning and be home by the evening, with the whole gentle day to do it in. He whistled the dogs to him, and they came. And he looked out once more over the high summer pasture, gold in the early sun. And then he turned to bring his flock down home. First, the dogs gathered the flock. The sheep were scattered wide over the high pasture, grazing the last of the morning, the way they always were. And gathering them was the dogs' work, and the dogs lived for it. They were young, Anders's two dogs, quick and keen and clever, in the prime of their working lives. He had raised them and trained them himself, and they knew his every whistle. They flew out now, low and fast across the pasture, one wide to the left and one wide to the right, sweeping round behind the scattered sheep and bringing them in, easing them, not frightening them, the way a good dog does, gathering the whole wide flock gently in toward the head of the path. Anders stood and watched them work, and was, as he always was, quietly proud of them. He was old now, and slow on the steep ground, and could not run the mountain the way he once had. But he did not need to, because the dogs could, and he had taught them to, and that was simply how it went. The legs grew old, and you trained up young legs to do the running, and the work went on. At his heel stood old Bran, his own first dog, grey about the face now, and long retired from the running, who came along on these journeys only to be near his master, and who watched the young ones work with the calm and knowing eye of an old hand who had done it all himself, once, and done it well. When the flock was gathered, all of them, the ewes and the grown lambs bunched and ready at the head of the path, the led ewes with their soft bells at the front, Anders gave the long, low whistle that meant the start, and set off down, and the led ewes followed him, their bells beginning to ring soft and steady. And behind them, the whole flock flowed forward and down to the path, and the young dogs took up their places at the edges, and the long, slow walk home began. And down they went, all the long, gentle day. The path off the high pasture was an old one, worn into the mountain by hundreds of years of flocks going up in the spring and coming down in the autumn. And Anders and his sheep followed it down now, as their kind always had, out across the high, bare tops, in and amongst the great grey rocks, and then down through the high gap in the mountains, the pass, where the wind blew cold and thin, and then down and down, the whole flock pouring slow along the narrow path like water finding its way downhill. It was unhurried, the way down. A flock cannot be hurried, and should not be, and Anders never tried. He let them set their own slow pace, drifting and cropping a little as they went, and he walked behind and among them at the pace of the slowest, and the dogs ran the edges keeping the stragglers in, and the bells rang soft and steady on the led ewes at the front, all the long way down. There was no sound in all the wide morning, but the bells, and the hooves on the stone, and the wind, and now and then Anders's low whistle to a dog, the old quiet music of a flock coming down a mountain that had sounded on these slopes every autumn for 1,000 years. And as they came down, the mountain changed around them, the way it always did. Up at the top, it had been bare and grey and cold. The thin, high air and the rock and the first snow on the peaks above. But step by step, lower and lower, the world grew kinder. The first thin grass came back underfoot, and then the first low bushes, and then the first trees, and the air warmed and softened and lost its high, cold edge, and the autumn colours came on, the slopes going gold and rust red and warm in the low afternoon sun. The cold of the heights fell away behind them and above them, and it was, lower down, a mild and golden autumn day. Anders felt the warming come up to meet him in his old bones, and was glad of it, the way he was glad of it every single year. Down and down, the bells ringing soft, the dogs working easy, the whole flock walking home. Part way down, where the path crossed a stream coming off the mountain, Anders stopped to rest and water the flock. The sheep spread out to drink and to crop the grass along the bank, and the dogs flopped down panting in the cool shallows and lapped at the water. And Anders sat himself on a warm rock in the sun and ate a little bread and cheese and rested his old legs a while, in no hurry. The valley still a good way below, but the day still young. It was there, at the rest, that he saw which one was lagging. There was always one, a lamb of the spring, usually the smallest of the year, or one gone footsore on the long stony path, that fell behind and came in last and stood at the back of the flock looking weary. This year it was a small late lamb, the littlest of them all, who had walked gamely the whole way from the top, but was tiring now on the long descent, and stood apart and would not graze, only stood with its head held a little low. Anders knew that look. He had seen it in 100 small lambs over 100 autumns. So when they set off again, he did the thing he had done for all those 100 small lambs before. He went and gathered the little one up and settled it across his shoulders, behind his neck, with a small leg held in each of his hands. The old way, the way shepherds have always carried a tired lamb. And he carried it himself, the rest of the way down. It was no weight to speak of, a lamb, and it settled at once across his warm shoulders, and left off its weary standing, and rode the last of the journey home in the safest place on the whole mountain. And Anders walked on down with the small, warm weight of it about his neck, and did not mind it in the least. It was, if anything, his favourite part of the whole day, the carrying of the tired one, the small life resting trustful on his shoulders, the surest sign there ever was that he was bringing them home. Down and down, and the valley growing greener below. And then, in the long golden afternoon, they came round the last shoulder of the mountain, and there below them, at last, was home. The whole home valley opened out beneath them, green still and sheltered and warm in the low sun. The river winding bright along the bottom of it, the village with its grey roofs and its threads of rising smoke, the patchwork of small fields, and just below them now, the home pastures and the old stone fold where the flock would winter, snug and safe under the shoulder of the lower hills. After the bare grey heights, after the long day's walking, there it all was, soft and green and waiting. And the sight of it was the gladdest sight of the shepherd's whole year. The flock saw it too, or smelled it rather, smelled the home valley and the home grass coming up to meet them, and they quickened of their own accord, the whole tired flock lifting its pace and pouring down the last green slopes toward home. The bells ringing faster and brighter now, the dogs trotting glad alongside, the little lamb lifting its head on Anders' shoulders to look. They were nearly down. They were nearly home. And high, high above them now, far up on the peaks they had left that morning, Anders could see the snow beginning to come down at last out of a greying sky onto the high pasture. The winter arriving up there, behind them and after them, and too late to catch them, for they were down and safe and well ahead of it, the way they were every year. He brought them on down the last of the slope as the afternoon turned to gold and the warm valley rose to meet them. They came down into the home valley in the last of the gold light and brought the flock in. The dogs eased them off the open hill and down the lane and in through the gate of the home pasture, the snug walled fields under the lower hills where the deep snow never came, and the sheep spread out onto the rich low grass with the small glad sounds of animals that know that they are home. Anders lifted the little lamb down from his shoulders at last and set it on its feet on the home grass, and it found its mother in a moment and was a tired lamb no longer, but only a lamb at home, and ran. And then Anders did the last thing, the thing that closed the season. He counted them. He stood at the gate in the falling evening and counted the flock through, the old slow, careful count, the way he had every autumn of his life. And they were all there, every one. The whole flock he had taken up the mountain in the spring, brought down again whole in the autumn. Not one lost to the heights or the long path. Every ewe and every grown lamb, and the littlest late one too, all of them down and in and safe and home before the snow. The count came right, the way it had come right year on year on year, and Anders shut the gate on his whole safe flock and stood a moment with his hand resting on the cold top bar of it, and was about as deeply content as a man can be. For that was the whole of it, really. The whole of a shepherd's long year, and the whole of a shepherd's long life. To take them up in the spring, and mind them all the summer, and bring every one of them safely down again before the winter. He had done it once more. The flock was home. The young dogs flopped down in the lane, spent and happy, and old Bran eased his grey bones down among them with a sigh. The first stars were coming out over the valley, and the soft bells, as the flock spread out to graze the home pasture in the dusk, fell slowly, one by one, quiet. The whole flock safely down and home in the green valley, grazing slow and content in the last of the light. The gate shut, the count come right, everyone brought down before the snow, the young dogs and the old one resting easy together in the lane, the little lamb back with its mother, high above, the winter coming down at last on the empty peaks, and down here only the warm valley and the quiet, and a season faithfully kept, the soft bells falling still, one by one, as the dusk comes gently down.